I yawned as my eyes opened to the dark ceiling above me. The window next to my bed allowed the sun to shine into my room and thankfully wasn't high enough in the sky yet to shine into my face. It was almost tempting enough to go back to sleep and wake up later, but I sadly had to get down to business immediately. Pulling the covers off my body, I stepped out of bed and stretched my arms and tails before sauntering over to the table in the middle of my room. The wooden floors felt cold on my bare feet, and my underwear did little to block the cold from my body. The only other thing I was wearing was a black choker with a glowing red jewel in it. It was one of my prized possessions, a world item. I had gotten that from my own hard work, as well as from being extremely lucky when the item had finally dropped. It wasn't the flashiest item, but it had an extremely useful ability that synchronized with my class. My world item was called the Seed of Yggdrasil. A slightly pretentious name for an item that stores mana and refunds that mana as extra non-resistant damage for a player's next attack. What made the item one of the broken parts of Yggdrasil was that it had no storage limit for how much mana it could hold. And since I had a continuous regeneration of mana, I'd been storing part of the percentage of mana I regenerated into the seed. The only downside to the item was that when it was used, all the stored mana inside it was used at once. And, considering the staggering amount of mana I had stored into the item, it was a guaranteed one-hit kill. I used that world item the most of the three I had. The second item was one that I kept in my inventory as a last resort. The final world item was stored away in a very difficult-to-reach location. It did make me wonder if I could still access that area from this new world. Another thing to add to my to-do list. Of those 3 world items, I'd only ever gotten the Seed of Yggdrasil through honorable means. The other 2 items had been pilfered from a player and a guild respectively. Normally, a player in possession of 3 world items was a blue moon. The only reason why I'd been able to get the other 2 was due to gaining my first world item and then getting my Daughter of Inori racial class. The reactions of the players when they lost their world items was one of my best experiences in Yggdrasil. I quickly shook myself out of my reminiscing and made it over to the table where I pulled out a chair and sat down on it. The wood of the chair was surprisingly not that cold on my ass, which was a pleasant surprise. I then looked down at the 3 bags of coins I had in this kingdom's currency. I took the time to separate all the coins in each bag into separate piles that I counted up. What my total came down to was 122 copper coins combined from both the jobs I did as well as from the money pile of the goblins and trading the gold coin in. 268 silver from trading in the gold coin and the goblin hoard. From what I've seen about food and lodging, I could probably buy much of the supplies I needed for the goblins today and still have much left over for the next day. Preferably, I would start the goblins off with simpler tools and weapons before giving them enchanted items. That way, I wouldn't have to worry about them accidentally killing each other or burning the forest down. I'd work up from there. After shopping for the goblin supplies, I would probably investigate some of the other stores to see if there were any that I could use my skills to profit from. My alchemist class allowed me to create amazing potions which I mainly used to heal myself or buff my attacks or defense. Besides alchemy, I also had healing spells and the ability to create and enchant items. Sadly, that was most of my simple crafting abilities that weren't too ridiculous. The only other abilities I had that I could make a profit from involved massive terrain augmentation and other large-scale spells. It was at a time like this that I was a little annoyed that I didn't know more recreational spells. What I did wonder, now that I was in this new world, is if I no longer had a cap on learning new spells? If that was the case, then I could definitely learn the spells of this world, which I would guess were more utilitarian in nature due to the realism here compared to a game world. I would need to research this more thoroughly later, probably at the Magician's Guild as well as from Nina. Which reminds me that I need to meet with the adventuring group soon. This is when I got up from my chair and walked over to the dresser where I had set my clothes from yesterday and began the process of putting my divine items on. That was strange to me at first when I didn't have any trouble putting my clothes on or taking them off last night, but I just wrote it off as a convenient quirk of this body. Where I might once have felt a modicum of embarrassment at seeing my new naked body, I didn't anymore. Most of that had been in part because of how I had taken some time last night to investigate this new body of mine. I'll admit with some pride that I've got a great pair of tits and an ass that won't quit. It took less than a minute to put the rest of my clothes on, pull the collar of my dress over the choker I was wearing, and slid my boots onto my feet. I figured out why women love to wear high heels so much. I gained so much height from putting them on. Normally, my character is 5 feet 9 inches, but these boots make me almost 5 feet 11 inches. Still didn't compare to my height in the other world where I was over 6 feet tall. Taking some time to look in the mirror in my room, I started to comb the hair on my head with my nails, which still could be felt through the gloves I wore, until my hair didn't have the bedhead that I'd woken up with. The long hair wasn't acting as much like a hindrance as I thought it would, but it needed to get held back to avoid getting into my eyes during a fight. Maybe I'd learn to braid it, until then I'd just tie it back into a ponytail. After my thorough grooming of the hair on my head as well as that of my tails, and putting my hair up into a ponytail, I put my pair of glasses on, activated my kitsune illusion, and walked over to the table with my money on it. I dumped 30 silver and 50 copper coins into a pouch and walked out of my room before locking the door behind me. After that, I walked downstairs to the bar where I saw the innkeeper, whose name I found out last night is Morgan, was busy cleaning some dishes. Taking a seat at the bar counter, Morgan's eyes flicked up to me before going back down to the mug he was cleaning. "What can I do for you today, Miss Blanc?" Morgan asked as he set the cleaned mug with a row of other cleaned mugs. I put on a friendly smile before answering, "Mind serving me some breakfast this morning?" Morgan nodded and walked to the door behind the bar. A few moments later, he came back with a plate of sliced ham and potatoes which he set down in front of me. "1 copper, Miss Blanc," he said while holding out an open hand. I quickly fished out a copper coin and set it into his hand. Morgan set the plate down onto the counter afterwards and gave me a fork to go along with it. "You don't need to be so formal, just call me Kasha," I told him as I took a bite of the ham. It wasn't bad ham, but the way food preparation here compared to back home left a bit to be desired. Maybe I could try my hand at cooking here if my other business ideas didn't work out? Morgan smirked as he pocketed the coin into his apron. "At least you aren't like other adventurers that I've served here. Most of the newbies think they're hot shit until they either get a thrashing or work in the guild long enough." "Really? And how many times was it that you dealt the thrashings?" I said before taking another bite of the ham. Morgan chuckled at my response as he went back to cleaning his mugs. "Surprisingly, I don't do the thrashings that often. Usually, it's the other patrons who beat on the new guys." When Morgan mentioned the other patrons, I didn't even have to turn my head to know that there was no one here at the bar. My ears and sense of smell told me loud and clear. Good thing I'm not like other adventurers then. I smirked and gave Morgan a wink when I said this. Then I returned to eating my breakfast once more. Morgan's eyebrow rose up slightly as he looked at me. "Yeah, good thing, else I would have made you pay more for the room you have." Morgan responded. "At least I know I'm on his good side." A few moments later, and I felt my ears twitch as the inn's door opened. I quickly noticed that the shuffling of boots on the floor meant that there were 3 people, and a quick sniff in the air told me that all 3 were males, and they all smelled awful. Did they never take a bath or something? Unfortunately, the smell didn't leave and instead grew as the 3 men took a seat at a table behind me. One of the males spoke up, "Old man, mind getting us some ale and food?" I felt baffled at the tone this newcomer had, and I quickly glanced at Morgan, who had a stony expression. "One moment." Morgan answered as he picked up 3 of the dirty mugs and gave me a wink before turning around to one of the tapped barrels. When he filled the mugs, I could easily smell how disgusting the drinks were, but I said nothing. As Morgan was filling up the mugs, I listened in on the conversation of the group behind me. "Guild later today. I need to make some quick cash for some new pieces of armor," one of the men said. "With the rusted shit that you're wearing now, you need an entirely new set of armor in general. The first man from before stated. "You shouldn't be saying shit, Luther. That stinking leather armor of yours smells to high heaven." The other man answered, which made all the men at the table laugh. I just rolled my eyes and finished with eating the rest of my breakfast. I didn't want to be in this building any longer with the stench these men were emitting. When Morgan came back to the bar after delivering the drinks, I left a silver coin on the counter. He glanced down at the silver coin and looked back up at me with a questioning glance. "Use that as payment for my room tonight and keep the change," I told the innkeeper before getting up from my chair and exiting the building. When I made it onto the bustling streets, I took a deep breath of air that wasn't tainted by the stink of those men. After that, I walked down the street for a while to my first destination, the Guildhall. It only took me a short amount of time, but when I arrived in front of the Guildhall, I saw that it was bustling with activity as people were coming and going, much more than yesterday. I assumed that it was due to the way regular adventurers might only be able to complete a job a day compared to my rate of completion. I wouldn't lie about my interest in what job I'd be doing with my new adventuring team today. Hopefully it would be something less dull than the 2 jobs I did yesterday. But, thinking about the goblin job yesterday, I realized that I needed to get them their supplies today, which did make me wonder about something. I looked around and quickly spotted an alleyway that I could duck into. When I believed that I was out of sight of the general public, I cast my spell, Replicant, and watched with eager anticipation as a flame split off of my body and quickly formed a complete copy of me. What I didn't expect was for that copy to gain a large toothy grin as she gave me a once-over. My, now that I get a good look at myself, I can admit that we look damn fine. My copy said in a breathy tone as she started stretching her body. "This is certainly a surprise," I said in interest. "But not an unwanted one. After all, the Replicant clone usually has a shitty program that runs it." My clone added. I couldn't say I disagreed with her. After all, I did make a good point. "I guess this new world adjusts more of my spell effects than what we originally thought," I reasoned aloud. If a spell like this could be given its own sapience, then what did that mean about other spells of mine that summoned other beings? I definitely needed to do more testing of some of my more serious spells first in an isolated environment before I used them in full combat. I'm not exactly against this change. All it means is that we'll have an amazing time using the Replicant spell in battle and daily use. My clone explained before a smirk came across her face as she put a finger under her chin in thought. "Though, I'm a little interested in things that you haven't tested out in this new body." My eyebrow raised at her statement. "As long as whatever it is that you're planning to test out doesn't involve bad publicity, harming innocents or the like, I'm all for it. I can't exactly test everything about this new body today since I'll be with the adventuring group today." My clone nodded in agreement. "I got it. I am you after all. I'll take care of the goblins as well while you deal with the adventuring party." She answered in agreement. At least she knew the task that I summoned her here for to begin with. I wanted to pull out the money she'd need to purchase the goblin equipment, but I stopped myself when I had an idea. "I'm wondering, would you be able to access my inventory space?" My clone shrugged before concentrating for a moment. She then stuck her hand into space and pulled out a large sack of coins with a massive grin on her face. "Guess that problem is solved. Before I go, could you do something to disguise your appearance? I don't feel like dealing with questions about why I've been spotted in 2 places at the same time." My clone snapped her fingers and was covered in a swirl of light. When it died down, she was now covered in purple hooded cloak and dress. Quickly pulling up the hood, her face was now obscured with only a few golden locks of hair being visible besides everything below her nose. "Better?" she asked. I nodded in reply. "Good luck with getting the items," I said as I left the alleyway and headed to the Guildhall. I saw out of the corner of my eye that my clone had left the alley and was now heading down the opposite direction of the street. When I finally entered the Guildhall, it only took me a few seconds until I heard Lucrute call me from across the room. He and the rest of the adventuring group were all sitting together and most likely waiting for me to show up. I appreciated that from the group. After all, we hadn't even known each other for an hour and they seemed to very considerate. It was weird to have possible friends, but I'd have to see how this would turn out before I could truly label them anything. So, to not delay the group any longer, I quickly made my way over to them with a smile on my face. "Morning. What's the plan for today?" I asked while taking a seat between Lucrute and Nina. Peter was the first to speak up. "Greetings, Kasha. We managed to snag a simple extermination job involving a pack of ogres as well as some goblins. Apparently, they've been building up around a few farms by Rantle and it's become quite a problem." Peter answered excitedly. I could understand why a job like that would be important, and most likely pay quite well. Cities thrived on their ability to be defendable and to be able to feed those that lived within its territory. If a city ran out of food from outside farms, then the stored food supplies for winter, droughts, and sieges would be quickly used up. There were similar occurrences like that in Yggdrasil. I remember a top-tier guild whose claim to fame was their pure monopoly on a mine that had extremely rare ore. When an enemy guild managed to take over that mine, the other guild quickly fell apart without any income. I had been working with the enemy guild at the time since they promised me help against one of the bosses I needed to fight. I also got to keep some spoils from that raid, so it was a win-win situation for me. Though, I did feel a little sorry for that guild. Heard their guild leader quit after that, but then again, it may have been a lie. Regardless, this city depended on the food that it could receive, though why the guards weren't coming out to help these farms was a complete mystery to me. I can only assume that it's because they're lazy. I mean, why else would they have hired me to clear out that graveyard for them when they were perfectly capable to do it themselves? Damn cowards. Honestly, I could easily wipe this city off the map if I wanted to. From what I've seen of this place as of now, it didn't seem like their magic defenses were that powerful. Sounds like it'll be an interesting job. Any specifics about these ogres and goblins that have been attacking farms? I asked Peter. He gave me a slightly angry look. They've been eating the farmers as well as the crops. Right now, there has been a pattern to these attacks. He quickly pulled out a map and unfolded it onto the table so that I could get a clearer view. Then, he pointed to an eastern farm near Rantle. It started from here. Since then, the ogres and goblins have been moving from the eastern farms to the southern farms. He then pointed to a southern farm near the woods that I'd encountered the goblins yesterday. Oh, shit. The goblins were talking about the ogres being extremely voracious recently, but now I had proof. Hopefully the goblin group would be safe in their hidden glade until my clone arrived. I seriously doubted that they could handle fighting ogres and other goblins that were so blatant to be raiding farms near a city. I nodded in understanding to Peter. Any description on the number of ogres and goblins in this raiding band? 6 ogres and 8 goblins from the last count. It may have changed since then. This would be child's play for me. I could easily clear out the entire group with one spell, but I did wish to see how my new team would do in a fight, so I may hold back a little bit. Sounds like fun. We ready to go? I responded with a grin. This was going to be a simple task for me to accomplish. Certainly, beautiful. We were just waiting for you. Lucrute answered. I wondered if that man would ever run out of compliments. Maybe I should do something for him. Dinner. Definitely dinner. At least I know I'm wanted, I teased back. Lucrute laughed at my response. You'll always be wanted in my heart, Kasha. The blonde said with that exaggerated over-the-top tone that I was beginning to get used to. He'll land a girlfriend one day with that confidence of his, I'm sure of that. Of course, I will, I said before turning my attention to Peter. How much will this job be paying us? 100 silver. 20 for each of us when we split it. Is there an issue? Peter asked with some concern. I wasn't sure if it was because he thought I wouldn't be up for a job that would only give me 20 silver. I better alleviate his fear now, so he won't have to worry. Not at all. 20 silver is a hell of a lot more than what I got paid doing my last 2 jobs, I said with a disarming smile. This seemed to calm Peter's fears a bit as he gained a smile as well. "Good thing you decided to join up with us then," Dine added in a friendly tone. "Copper plates barely make enough money to go through a day of food, supplies, and an inn. They usually resort to taking multiple jobs because of it." The large man then pointed to Nina, who seemed to shrink from my attention on her. Nina was almost homeless because he could barely afford the rent for his room. "What changed?" I asked, completely curious. I saw Nina at the guild one day and decided to talk to him. He was shy at first, but I eventually found out that he was a mage. Since our group needed a magic user, I invited Nina to join us. Dine explained. Though, that didn't exactly explain how splitting up the measly pay of a copper plate job could allow any of them to survive. I let my question be known, and Lucrute was quite eager to answer it. Originally, all 4 of us would each individually take a job. Afterwards, we'd meet up at the guild hall with our pay and put it into a pot. We'd split it based on who had the greatest need. When we all became silver plates, that changed since the pay got a lot better. "Sounds like all of you are very close-knit," I remarked. "Very," Peter replied. "We've been together long enough that I couldn't imagine doing a job without these 3 watching my back." I nodded in understanding before standing up from my chair. The other quickly followed my lead when I did this. "If that's the case, I hope that I'll be able to earn your trust, and you, mine. Shall we get going?" "Ready when you are," Dine answered happily. I couldn't put my finger on why, but that big, bearded man seemed like a giant teddy bear. He was the opposite of Lucrute's high energy and youthful spirit, with how he was calm and at peace with everything around himself. It made me want to become good friends with him. Lucrute was quite easy to read. He was an excitable man who had an avid interest in the opposite sex as well as a lust for adventure. Even with the playful nature of his, I could see an intelligence in his eyes. And there couldn't be a doubt that he had an intelligence about him. If not based on academic subjects, then it was invested more in prediction of movement on the battlefield. After all, modern-day snipers armed with rifles still had to work on predicting where a person was going to move as well as judge the distance, wind speed, trajectory, and many other facets to hit their target. And that was with modern-day technology. I was intrigued to see how skilled Lucrute was with that bow of his in an actual battlefield. Nina and Peter were still the ones that I hadn't really figured out yet. It was obvious that Peter was a charismatic leader that had managed to keep a diverse group like this together, and yet, he also seemed older than he looked with a sense of justice to match. I would have to see more on his leadership ability before I could fully judge it. Nina was the odd one out with how shy and reserved she was. Hiding her gender showed that she had an awareness of the harshness of the world, but if my guess was correct then none of this group knew of her actual gender, then it meant that she was probably worried about how the group might react. Like Peter, I would need to see more before I could make a full assessment of her, and maybe I could coax her out of that shell of hers. She'd probably look nice if she cleaned up a bit and dressed in a more feminine style. Also, I really wanted to see the looks of shock when this group figured out her actual gender. That would be an event for later. Until then, I would just try and build up her confidence a little bit. I also needed to see if I could teach any of the spells I know to people of this world and vice versa. Nina would be a good test subject for my curiosity. It had been half an hour since we had gotten on the road to the next farm that was to be raided by the ogres and goblins. During this time, I found myself chatting with the group about random subjects. These topics would range from good shops in E-Rantle to politics. I would sit out of the political discussion to listen and gain more knowledge about the country I was in. From what I found out by listening, this kingdom of Re-Estais is ruled by Ramposa III. While the man is a good ruler, he's old and is losing more of his strength every day. His eldest son, Barbaro, is apparently an aggressive man who is more headstrong than wise. That made me a little worried since from what I knew of all the fantasy books I've read, a prince like that was more likely to be a warmonger instead of a peacekeeper. His other son, Zanak, while much smarter than Barbaro, is more out of shape and weaker than Barbaro. And, From what I know about politics, the stronger a potential candidate seems, the more likely the people are to support them. I had no doubt that if Zaynak is as smart as he seems, then he was probably planning to remove his brother from succession of the throne in order to take it for himself. Besides those two, Ramposa has 3 daughters, with 2 already having been married off. The one daughter that still lived in the palace, Rena, is known as the Golden Princess for her kindness to the people and her beauty. I'm still sexier. If she is as kind and air-headed as Lucrute made her seem, then it would be a miracle if she wasn't assassinated by her 20th birthday. From that, I also learned that Riestais also has a continual war with the Baharuth Empire. I didn't know if I should jump in joy at being proven right about the Baharuth being a conquering nation or if I should groan at how obvious it was. Apparently, the Baharuth have had skirmishes with Riestais on the Katsa Plains every year during the harvest season. When I heard this, I could already see what was happening. Dine was kind enough to explain the drafting this country has for its military, with most recruits being farmers or other peasants who would temporarily bulk up the military before being sent off to the Katsa Plains. If my guess is correct, Baharuth is attacking this kingdom at its most pivotal point, the harvest season, in an effort to grind Riestais' supplies down. Since this kingdom would recruit many farmers and other peasants for their army, then those peasants would be unable to farm when the harvest was ripe. This would mean that the kingdom would be continually feeding their army and populace while not recovering food for that harvest. Since this continual war has been happening for years now, I'm frankly surprised that this kingdom hasn't collapsed from being unable to feed its populace. The Baharuth are just playing a waiting game at this point until Riestais can no longer put up a fight. Then they'll just steamroll over this kingdom. I would need to look more closely at this political minefield before I would make a decision to trip it. Until then, I would just remain a neutral party. Personally, I wanted to avoid creating too many large ripples in this world until I knew what sharks swam in its waters. And, from talking to Nina about some aspects of magic, I learned that 6th tier magic is the highest anyone in this world can perform, and of all the magic users that currently were known, barely any could use magic at that level. Anything higher was considered the realm of the gods. Put me into that equation and it was like comparing a bow and arrow to a nuclear warhead. The moment I truly started letting loose my spells, I would immediately be labeled a divine being. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. Technically, I am a demigoddess, and in the legends of the Kitsune, they could eventually turn into gods after enough time had passed or something similar. I like the sound of that. But it also brings up potential issues with myself and this world. For one thing, I have the classes, Chosen of Freya, and Chosen of Loki, which already means that I was chosen by both deities to be their earthly representative. Oh my various possible gods. I needed to test my Loki's call ability as soon as possible. It allowed me to summon Loki as well as some of his children and Ratatoskra. If the surprising sapience my clone displayed earlier was any indication, I could potentially be summoning the actual god of mischief. After this job, I'm going to the woods somewhere to test that ability. Hey, Kasha, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself? Peter asked me, which disrupted me from my train of thought. I looked at him before saying, "What?" I was just asking if you would like to tell us a bit about yourself. The trip to the farm is going to take a while, and we were a little interested in knowing more about you. Peter elaborated. I was slightly expecting and dreading this conversation, but it had to happen sometime or later. Well, what would you like to know? I asked openly. This was going to be a good test of my improv skills, but they say the best lies have a mixture of truth in them. Peter was the first to respond. Where do you come from? You aren't a local, that's for sure. But your style of dress is unique to this kingdom as well as seems like something a noble would wear. You are right about me being a foreigner. I come from a land far to the east past the Draconic Kingdom and Baharuth Empire. I answered before smiling at the thought of my next answer. And for you wondering about my style of dress, it's not because of any type of nobility, but because of hard work that I underwent to make it myself. Wow, a beautiful mage and seamstress. You are perfect. Lucrute complimented, which I took in stride as I'd blow his mind with my next statement. Though, you are right about nobility, I'm actually of royal nobility. I finished, leaving all my comrades bug-eyed and open-mouthed at my statement. Technically, I'm telling the truth since I'm the daughter of Inori, a goddess of foxes. And, if a bunch of rulers can claim that a divine being told them that they had the right to rule, then being the child of a divine being meant that I could skip the process of being told so by a deity. Wait, what? Lucrute sputtered out in confusion, but, if you are a royal, then what are you doing as an adventurer? You could be living the dream in a palace somewhere. My mother is the type that doesn't care about royalty. Any of my other siblings I've had didn't receive any special treatment and had to work for everything they got. I'm no different. And it was true. There had only been 2 other kitsune who had received the Daughter of Inori class. Frankly speaking, all 3 of us kept quiet about the class because we knew that if people figured out the details of that class, we'd be hunted and parked over and over until our characters stayed dead. Our class is a game breaker in itself because it allows for a full revive from death with no penalties for one thing. Another is that the Daughter of Inori class was the only way in the entirety of Yggdrasil to be able to regenerate mana without the need to wait multiple hours for it to replenish naturally. Where most races using magic would burn through their mana after a couple high-level spells, a full-fledged kitsune would still have a titanic amount of mana left. And then, with the passive, Ica of the Divine, that kitsune would regain 0.05% of their maximum mana back every second they weren't casting spells or affected by their own spells. Essentially, kitsune could bomb an entire group of players to hell, and then keep going. I abused this passive so much whenever I dueled another high-leveled player. After a while of casting a bunch of large spells, I would lure them into a false sense of security before nuking them when they thought I was helpless and out of mana. The trick works best when wearing clothing or accessories that hide your mana. That way, other players would never know at what level your mana is at, and you will be able to continue fucking with them in PvP. You're quite unique compared to most nobility in Riest's eyes if that's the case. You wouldn't find a noble here caught dead doing menial labor like adventuring, Dine stated with a smile. It's nice to see that not everyone born to a privileged lifestyle will avoid interacting with commoners like us. Why would I? Frankly, the only reason that nobles think they're better than everyone else is because of their family name. We're all the same. We all bleed, eat, and shit. Not even a name can change that. I replied, which made Dine, Lucrute, and Peter smile in return. I noticed that Nina seemed slightly more relaxed after I said this, which made me think that the girl may have had bad experiences with nobles in the past. Words to live by, Dine said sagely. If you don't mind, would you care to tell us what brought you from your lands to this kingdom? I'm a traveler. I enjoy exploring new places and learning new things. That was the truth. When I was in Yggdrasil, I took the time to explore more of the hidden nooks and crannies that players would miss. I also found traveling to the 9 different realms to be an absolute delight. The developers really went all out on making each realm completely unique to one another. Hopefully, you'll choose to stay for a long time in Riest's eyes, and Rantel especially, Lucrute said, finally finding his voice after the revelation I dropped on the entire group. I put my hand under my chin in a thinking pose. I just might. There hasn't been much that I've disliked about this kingdom from what I've seen. And there's still quite a bit more to explore. I mused. A large grin grew on Lucrute's face when I said this. At least he seemed happy with my answer. Since we're trading our stories, mind telling me why you 4 joined the adventuring business? Peter was the first to speak. I was born in Rantel. When I was a kid, I'd spend a lot of my time in the Adventurers Guild hearing all these stories about heroic adventurers who would save people. One adventurer at the guild decided to take me under his wing and taught me how to read, write, and fight. So, Peter was definitely the charismatic hero type. What happened to the adventurer that taught you? I asked, curious. He decided to retire a couple of years ago. By now, The old man is probably sipping on wine at his small vineyard. I visit him every few weeks and trade stories with him. He usually gives me a bottle of wine during our talks. Peter finished. At least Peter didn't suffer the usual hero trope of his mentor dying. The next person to speak was Dine. I lived as a traveling druid for a couple of years. I'd travel to different villages and heal the sick and wounded when I arrived. Then, I encountered Peter on the road one day. He was traveling to the same village that I was heading to on a monster-slaying job, so we decided to arrive together. Lucrute patted Dine on the shoulder and chuckled. Dine's always been the type to help those in need. We sometimes even end up staying at a place longer since the big guy tries to help everyone before we leave. Lucrute complimented, which made my respect for the man grow. It made me wish that there had been more altruistic people like Dine in my world. Maybe then it wouldn't have turned to a corporate cesspool like it had. At the village, we found a few ogres attacking the village, which made us work together to fight them off. He would fight, and I'd heal him when necessary. After that, Dine then patted the head of Peter. He convinced me to join up with him as an adventurer. Sadly, Lucrute said with an embarrassed laugh, my reasons for becoming an adventurer aren't as noble as the others. I thought that becoming an adventurer would get me a better chance at attracting women. Don't be embarrassed, Lucrute, Dine said with a reassuring pat on the blonde's shoulder. Even if your intentions were selfish at the start, you've proven time and again that you've a good heart with all the people that you've helped. My ears quickly heard Lucrute whisper, you are the best hookup partner, ever. Dine chuckled before nodding. But now I know that my goal of becoming an adventurer was not in vain, for I might have never met the most beautiful woman in the world. Lucrute added with as much bravado as he could muster. I might never date him, but his personality was certainly growing on me. I fear that all the women in the world might grow jealous at your claims. And many might come crying to Rantle because I have stolen your attention from them, I said with a giggle. Wait, did I just giggle? That was strange, but it wasn't completely terrible. This body was messing with my head, that was something I was completely positive of. And what of it? You aren't that worried about it. You know, I made a good point. It had barely been 2 days in this new world, and the initial shock of being in this new body had completely disappeared since then. Now, I was noticing how much my mental state was changing with this body. For instance, I was beginning to see other males as attractive mates, and it felt weird seeing them as mates. Another involved how I was beginning to view other species. The goblins and hobgoblins that I was in charge of could now be categorized as weak, helpless, underlings, mine. Normal humans were weak, potential mates, playthings, interesting. That goblin band were under my leadership, I'll admit that. But I wanted to make them stronger than what they are now. They are like children in that regard. I just had to nurture them to their full potential while also creating a base of operations in that hidden grove. And, maybe that base could grow into a city that I'd be queen of. I was once human myself, so how could I view my former race with any form of disdain? Even if the humans that I've encountered could barely hold a candle to the massive sun that was my strength, that didn't mean they weren't without their own value. Every race was pitifully weak compared to me, so humans weren't unique in that regard. There was potential in every race, humans included. Like the goblins, I feel that I only needed to nurture their strength until they reached their potential. I felt strangely responsible for my former race. While goblins were like children, the humans are my children. If needed, I would intervene to ensure the survival of the human race here. Up to, and including, using force to end their petty squabbling. I'll also admit that humans would always hold a special place in my heart. They were the closest type of humanoid in this world that I felt that I could relate to. I doubted that there were others of my race in this new world, and if there were, they'd be few and far between. If there had only been 52 Kitsune players in all of Yggdrasil, then I doubted that this new world would be so accommodating. The species must continue. You might be the last of your kind in this world. This was way too soon for me to think like that, but at the same time I couldn't help but notice that part of me agreed with that thought. Even more terrifying, I think that I'm starting to lose myself to this body. I had to get to the bottom of this quickly, before more of my mentality changed in much more drastic ways. I finally ripped myself from my internal debate and looked over to Nina, who had remained silent during this chat. I decided to speak, if only to coax the girl out of her shell. Nina, if you don't wish to share your past with me, that's fine. I'm always here if you wish to talk, I said to the shy girl. She glanced at me with her blue eyes, and I saw a smile appear on her face after a few moments. Then, she spoke. Thank you for the offer, Kasha. I don't like to talk about my past that often. I might tell you one day. I nodded in understanding of her decision. With the type of hesitation that Nina was showing about talking about her past, she probably suffered in one way or another that she found to be traumatizing. If you don't want to talk about your past, would it be too personal to tell me about why you wanted to become a mage? I was a little curious about why she became a mage of all things. Nina showed much less reluctance at this question. I was born with an innate talent that lets me learn magic faster than usual. Innate talent? Was that like a passive skill in Yggdrasil? Are talents something everyone can get? I asked. Not really, Kasha. Peter answered. Talents are slightly rare for people to be born with, and not all of them are useful like Nina's. I heard tale of one person whose talent let him predict what the weather might be like, though he wasn't always accurate. But you also have people like our local alchemist apprentice, Furya, who has the talent to use any and all magic items. That was very interesting. I think I might pay this Furya a visit to measure him up. And, I also wondered how my alchemy skills would compare to someone in this world. 2 birds with 1 stone. Very interesting. I then looked back to Nina. Ignore my rambling, please continue. Since my talent gave me an edge in learning magic, I wanted to improve myself, which is how I ended up coming to Rantel. Nina looked away from me with hesitation before she decided to continue. Nina paused before continuing. Sister is the one who originally pushed me to learning magic. From the way that Nina was hesitant about mentioning her sister, I assumed that she may have been part of why Nina was hesitant to talk about her past. As we continued our trek down the road, I rested my hand on Nina's shoulder and gave it a reassuring squeeze. This made the girl look up to my smirking face. If you want, after this job I'll try and teach you some spells. I would like that, Kasha. I held my grip on her shoulder a little longer before I let go. Soon after, the scent of manure and chicken shit filled my nostrils, which made my face scrunch up in disgust. I held that expression for only a moment before my face went back into resting position. That stench told me that we were approaching a farm, and one with a bit of livestock. We're getting close to the farm, I announced to the group. They gave me a questioning look, with Peter being the one to talk. How do you know that? He wondered. I playfully tapped on my nose. My body's senses are slightly more advanced than an average person. I can smell the manure from where we are. I answered. Yeah, my body's senses were advanced, a hell of a lot more than I was underselling right now. That is a very useful ability. That'll help us when we're looking for the ogres and goblins. Are there any more amazing things about yourself that you haven't told us yet? Lucrute asked. Maybe, I teased, you'll just have to find out. Less than a minute later, our group could spot the red-painted building of a barn with a small house next to it. Around the farm were wooden fences which had a few cows meandering about. Aside from that, I could see a few chickens pecking at the ground for food. I couldn't spot any crops, so this farm must primarily raise livestock as its main method of profit. The farmer probably relied upon the produce made by the other nearby farms in order to feed their animals. As we continued our trek towards the barn, I took a glance around the area and already determined one problem. This farm was completely surrounded by trees. The ogres and goblins would have had an immensely easy time sneaking around the perimeter of the farm if I wasn't here. Where would you guess the farmer is? Nina wondered aloud. Barn or house? I'm thinking that he's in the barn since the early morning is when farmers start work. I answered. My answer being satisfactory enough for the group, we walked to the barn and peeked in to see a man sitting on a small stool milking one of the cows. "Hello?" Peter greeted, which made the man spare a glance over his shoulder to us before continuing to milk the cow. "You the adventurers that were called for?" the farmer asked with a friendly tone. "Yes, sir," Peter answered. "Supposedly, this is most likely the next area to be hit by the ogres and goblins. We're here to end the threat, but we'll need some of your assistance to do so." The farmer stopped milking his cow and gave it a pat on the side before he stood up and turned to us. The man wore a plain shirt and a pair of black pants that were held up by leather suspenders. The shirt did nothing to hide the corded muscles in the man's torso from years of hard labor. And he didn't have a bad-looking face either. Though, it was covered in a large amount of stubble which did little to detract from his looks. He gave us a smile and spoke, "Any help that I can lend to you adventurers is all yours. You're trying to save my livelihood after all. So, what can I do to help? You'll need to bring in your cattle to start off with. Else, you're likely to get them taken by the ogres and goblins. From what we know, these monsters like to raid quickly and run off with any stolen goods." Peter answered before looking at Nina and I. "Kasha or Nina, do either of you have any type of spell that can alert us if the goblins and ogres come by?" Nina shook her head disappointedly. I on the other hand had a few spells that could alert me of any intruders. My weakest, Perimeter, just gave me a basic warning of whatever triggered the area that I put it. The higher-level version of that spell could even reveal enemies who were using high-level sneak abilities or spells that hid their presence. Then, there were my traps. Those were very fun to use, especially since I could spam them onto a field and wait as my enemies were brutally subdued in it. Do you want a perimeter warning system or a bunch of traps? Could you do both? Yes, I can. It'll take me a few minutes to place everything, but I can get it done. My response made Peter and the rest of the group smile. Could you, please? I nodded and walked a small distance from the group. It was time to show them a glimpse of my power, and this would be one of those ways. Holding my left hand up, my feet were covered in a red magic circle as I cast my basic version of the spell, Perimeter, since I doubted that these ogres and goblins were all that special as to evade my spell. The spell was a simple one to cast, with the only real requirement being the mana cost to give the size of the area for the spell to work. Since I had a ridiculous amount of mana, I was able to easily cover the perimeter of the farm, and a little bit more into the woods. Beyond just detailed knowledge of beings that entered or left the spell zone, Perimeter could give me detailed knowledge of the terrain contained inside of itself. Even more details could be revealed when cast at a higher tier. After that, I cast my next spell, Foxfire Detonation, a Tier 3 spell that you placed in an area that could go off either due to enemies or from prematurely detonating the spell itself. The spell only costed however much mana you needed for the explosive size, and upon detonation, it would deal fire-based damage that would constantly burn its target for the next 30 seconds regardless of any attempts to extinguish it. Turning the spell into a higher-tiered version of itself granted extended length to the burn as well as power. Rule of thumb in Yggdrasil was that if I could detonate more than 10 of the highest tier onto a player, they'd die unless they had some way of healing the damage lost from the spell. The other fun part of the burning effect from the spell was that it could stack when cast at a higher tier. With my knowledge of the entire surrounding area, I spread my traps around the outer edge of the farm until I felt satisfied that it would clear out most if not all of the ogres and goblins that would arrive soon enough. Afterwards, I walked back to the group and spoke, I will now know of any being that enters or leaves this area. I would also recommend that none of you try to go near the edges of the farm since the traps I set will go off if you stand on them. One of the downsides to Foxfire Detonation was that it had a friendly fire mechanic to it. You must be a powerful sorceress if you can cast such spells so easily. The farmer complimented. I just grinned at the compliment. I try to believe that there is always someone better than me out there. Thankfully, I haven't met this person yet. I boasted, which made the farmer nod in agreement. Always a smart idea to keep your head from swelling up with an ego. Seen adventurers get killed because of it. Either way, I'm going to rein my cattle in. I'll even give you all an extra reward if you assist me. I saw the eyes of Lucrute and Nina light up at the mention of an extra reward. Sure. We'll help out. Lucrute responded immediately. He then fixed his gaze to me with a grin. With this extra reward, I'm wondering if you would want to have dinner with me tonight? I'm paying. Very tempting offer. I'm not against free food, and I might get to know more about this group, which is an added bonus. I hope you know a decent place. I can muster up quite an appetite when the occasion calls for it. I'm going to eat through Lucrute's coin purse if it was the last thing I did. After all, I can enjoy when people want to lavish food and gifts upon me. And Lucrute didn't seem unwilling to do so. Lucrute seemed overjoyed before he quickly ran off to one of the gated areas that contained cattle inside. That guy is completely hopeless, Peter said with a chuckle. Yeah, he probably is. Still, free food is something I'm always up for. Nina finally spoke up after all of this. I'm going to go help Lucrute and make sure that he doesn't get into too much trouble. She then took off after the love-struck archer and left the farmer, Peter, Dine, and I alone. Do you think they even know where they need to bring the cattle? Dine pondered aloud. Possibly not. The farmer answered. We going to tell them where they need to go? Not yet, I interrupted. I want to see what happens and this might be funny. The others shrugged at my answer and we all walked up to the fence and leant on it while watching Lucrute and Nina attempting to herd the cattle. It was a funny sight to see as one of the cows wouldn't move no matter how much the archer shouted at it to do so. Looks like Lucrute is getting frustrated. Peter remarked. 5 copper says that one of the cows is going to knock him on his ass, Dine said before pulling 5 copper coins out of his coin purse. Peter quickly did the same. I heard jingling next to me and looked over to see the farmer pulling 5 coins for his pocket. Mind if I get in on this? 5 says that none of the cows are going to do anything. Sure. Kasha, you in? I reached into the small coin pouch at my belt and fiddled around until I pulled out some copper coins. I'm betting that Lucrute falls because of his own mistake. I answered. With the bet set in, the 4 of us watched the entertainment as Nina was having better luck than Lucrute at getting the cows to follow her. Then again, she was also luring them with food which gave the cows a greater incentive to follow her than Lucrute. With Lucrute, he started tugging on rope collar of the cow to get it to move. It was a feeble attempt as the cow seemed to completely ignore Lucrute's pulling. By now, the cow seemed firmly locked in place. But even though the cow was unyielding, the rope collar with its bell attached to it wasn't. After a few tugs, the knot holding the collar undid itself and Lucrute quickly fell to the ground as his face grew red with embarrassment. Lucrute fell due to himself. I spoke with a small giggle. And the cow did nothing. Miss Kasha and I appear to have won this bet. The farmer added. Peter and Dine seemed to grumble before passing the coins over to the farmer and I, which we quickly split and put away. After that little bit of entertainment, the farmer ducked through his wooden fence and went off to help the 2 adventurers in the art of herding cows. So, what's your home country like, Kasha? Peter decided to ask me. It had its good parts, and it had its bad parts like any place. The country was large, so immense in fact, that much of it still hadn't been explored. I loved the place, but I doubt that I'll ever be able to go back. Peter and Dine looked at me with a good amount of concern. That sounds terrible. Is there any reason for why you can't go back? I glanced at Peter and Dine before I shook my head. I thank you for the concern, but I don't feel completely comfortable talking about that. Maybe one day I'll let you know, but until then I'd rather avoid discussing it. If you don't feel comfortable with discussing about your past, then that's perfectly fine. Just know that we're always available if you want to talk. Dine spoke up. I gave a soft smile to the 2 before fixing my gaze back to the cattle wranglers. With the farmer helping, Lucrute and Nina were both having an easier time with getting the cows back into the pens. Since I'm part of your group now, is there anything that you guys like to call yourselves? Any famous adventuring group must have a suitable name. Our group's name is the Swords of Darkness, which takes homage after the famous weapons that the Black Knight, one of the famous 13 heroes that fought back and defeated the evil deities, freeing the world from their rule. Our goal is to one day own the swords that the Black Knight originally used. Until then. As Peter said this, both he and Dine, almost as if practiced, pulled out matching black daggers with hilts ornamented in small dark jewels. We used these blades as a way to symbolize our camaraderie. After that, both adventurers sheathed their blades. I hope that you can accomplish this goal one day. Until the eye stopped moving as my perimeter spell alerted me that multiple beings had tripped my detecting system. This was quickly followed by a few of my traps detonating. Dine, Peter, and I quickly shared a look of understanding. 13 ogres and 18 goblins have entered my spells area. 2 ogres and 5 goblins died from my initial traps. I alerted the 2. A much higher count than what had been reported previously. Where did they get those number? It didn't matter, we have work to do. The demi-humans that were approaching our location would be child's play to eradicate for me. While it could save me a lot of time, I also was a bit curious of the capabilities of my new comrades, and a few enemies to fight against would give me a slight idea of what they could and couldn't do. Didn't mean that I wouldn't help them take care of some of the raiding demi-humans. Better stick to using third-tier spells so I didn't wipe out all of the raiders with one spell. Also, I needed to keep the collateral damage to a minimum since this farmer probably couldn't afford to lose too much of his land. My traps had enough space between the woods and the farmer's land to avoid setting anything on fire from the initial explosion. It also helped that since these enemies were so weak, they were immolated instantly. I could smell the stench of burning ogre and goblin from here, and it was bad enough that I started breathing solely from my mouth to avoid inhaling the scent into my nose. This was going to be an issue if I ever encounter smells worse than burning goblin and ogre. I seriously needed to get a handle on my nose if I wanted to avoid becoming incapacitated because of it. Regardless of smells, I had to rein in the fire spells unless I wanted this farm to go up in flames. Earth spells were out as well because of the damage that they caused from either upturning the ground or launching heavy rock projectiles in any direction. Since it seemed that spells had more permanence here than compared to Yggdrasil, then a bunch of large boulders weren't going to disappear from the area anytime soon. Wind spells used too much that made me worried about hitting any of my companions. But lightning spells, and spells that focused on single targets could work. They were highly controlled with very little risk of injuring my companions or causing collateral damage, and that was great for me as my class, World Disaster, made offensive spells I used more destructive than what they'd normally be. Lightning was the simplest choice, and I had a spell that could fit my earlier criteria. I looked over to Peter and Dine. You two are going to need better protection if you plan to attack those raiders up close, I stated before placing my hands on the shoulders of both men. Body of steel. When I said this, both men were covered in a soft metallic glow that faded, mana font. The next spell covered them in a gold aura before it faded away as well. The first spell was a simple second-tier spell that enhanced the defensive capabilities of whoever it was cast on. It was essentially a required spell for certain low-level caster classes because of how most caster classes couldn't wear armor unless they used a class-changing spell. I stopped using that spell a long time ago since I both learned better protective spells and got the perk, Tails of Adamantine, which essentially made my tails indestructible and allowed me to use them as a shield if needed. While I rarely if ever used the first spell, the second, Mana Font, let me convert my mana into stamina that I could then transfer to another character, or I could give that character mana from my reserves. It was rare for players in Yggdrasil to ever learn that spell because, for most characters, mana is a limited resource that takes hours to recharge. While the stamina boost was nice for physical fighting classes and the mana transfer could pull mana from other casters into another player who was the designated nuke, it was too expensive and would suck most casters dry after a few minutes. For me, that wasn't an issue as I always had an immense amount of mana to burn. I just never really had friends that I could use that spell on. But that is something that hopefully might change with the new allies I've gained. Kasha, what did you just do? Peter asked as he inspected his body. Both you and Dine are a lot tougher than before. It'll take a good blow to really scratch you. You're also not going to get tired as long as my enhancements on you last. I explained as my ears twitched to a noise behind us. Glancing over my shoulder, I spotted Nina and Lucrute running up to us. Just who I wanted to see, I stated as the two quickly climbed over the wooden fence and joined us. Not even bothering to explain, I buffed the two of them like I'd done for Peter and Dine. While Lucrute was about to ask before I quickly interrupted him. I gave both of you some enhancements that'll make you tougher and prevent you from feeling fatigued. Looking back to Peter, what's our plan? I wanted to see what his leadership skills were like, and this was a perfect moment to test him. Plus, if anyone got in trouble, I could easily bail them out if need be. Lucrute, focus your arrows on the goblins and try to take as many of them out as you can before they can reach Dine and I. Kasha and Nina, use your magic to injure and slow the ogres down. Dine and I will be going out onto the front lines to deal with anything that gets close. Peter drew his sword after saying this and turned to face the oncoming attackers. Dine pulled out his mace and joined Peter as both started moving forwards. I heard the twang of a bow as my eyes spotted an arrow quickly flying past their heads before burying itself into the skull of a goblin from over 80 meters away. Glancing over, I spotted Lucrute already lining up another shot before letting another arrow fly through the air, hitting another goblin. Guess all that talk about your archery skills wasn't for show, I teased the archer before focusing my eyes onto the raiders. 13 ogres and 16 goblins remaining. Time to even those numbers a bit. Spotting 3 ogres marching together with 4 goblins following after them, I had a quick idea in mind and wanted to see what Nina could do with her magic. Nina, know any water spells? A few, but they aren't powerful enough to hurt the goblins or ogres. My magic arrow would be more effective in damaging them. The girl quickly replied. I don't need you to hurt them, just get the group of 3 ogres and the area around them really wet. Can you do that? I asked while pointing at the specific group. Nina didn't seem to fully register what my plan was yet, but she quickly cast a spell that launched a large stream of water at the area from the tip of her staff. The ogres and goblins showed great annoyance at becoming soaked in the magically conjured water as well as from trudging through the muddy soil, but they didn't slow down their pace, which was fine with me. Holding my hand out, I channeled my mana into my spell, Lightning Stream, which fired a continuous stream of lightning at the soaked ground. It only took a moment before the electricity was conducted from the water and into the unlucky beings that were walking over the soaked ground. The entire group froze in place and began twitching as the electricity fried them from the inside out. When I finally cancelled the spell, all the ogres and goblins dropped to the ground like marionettes with their strings cut. A quick survey of the battlefield told me that Lucrute had killed 4 more goblins while Diane and Peter were battling an ogre that was about to be joined by some of its comrades. 10 ogres and 8 goblins remained. A tip for you, Nina, some spells can complement and strengthen the effects of others. Channeling another lightning spell, I fired it at an ogre that was getting too close to Diane and Peter. The moment the bolt of lightning hit the ogre in the head, it immediately spasmed in place before falling to the ground dead. Nina didn't have the same amount of ease with ogres like I did. She used a first-tier spell, Magic Arrow, that, while damaging to goblins, barely pierced deeply into the tough flesh of the ogres. Lucrute seemed to be getting the second highest kill count as he dropped 3 more goblins. With Lucrute and Nina having killed 5 goblins between the two of them, added with the ogre that I put down, we were left with only 9 ogres and 3 goblins. I heard a battle cry from Peter, who sliced the tendon in the back of the left leg of the ogre that he and Dine were fighting. It fell to one knee and gave Dine the opportunity to swing his mace in the side of the ogre's skull with a loud crack. The ogre fell to its side and stopped moving while Peter and Dine moved away from it and onto their next target. With 8 ogres being the only remaining remnants of their fighting force, I spotted 2 in the back of the pack that noticed the changing tide of the battle and ran away from the battle and into the woods. The rest of the ogres didn't take notice of this as they charged at Peter and Dine with reckless abandon. From the amount of time that it took those 2 to beat one ogre, I doubted that they could take on the 6 remaining ogres and survive. But even though I was going to do cleanup duty on the rest of the ogres, I believe that I've seen enough of their abilities to temporarily satisfy my curiosity. Lucrute, for instance, is an excellent archer who made me curious about what would happen if I gave him a heavily enchanted bow to use. If he's a silver-plated adventurer right now with the skill he has and the weak bow that he has now, could better equipment allow him to rank up in the guild? Food for thought. Nina is a fine enough caster, but I think that she could do well with more spells learned for the level she is at. One thing you don't want to do as a low-level magic caster is put all your skill into one spell. I've seen new casters in Yggdrasil who only bothered to learn 1 or 2 damage spells and would become flawed when a player or NPC was completely resistant to that spell. You need versatility as a low-level caster or you'll eventually encounter something that counters your spells. It's at higher levels that you can focus on specific areas in magic, since after a high enough level most spell resistances could be ignored, since, while a resistance to specific damage types can nullify part of the damage, a high enough amount of damage could ignore it. Peter showed that he had good leadership skills with the way that he'd been put on the spot by the raiders. Quick thinking is a skill needed to make decisions that could result in life or death. He could use better equipment, the entire group could, really. Dine showed that he was willing to fight on the front lines, and he did so competently. I didn't get to see all of the large man's skills, mainly because of how Druid were usually healers, and none of us required healing right now. But enough analysis, it's time to finish up this battle. Holding up my hand, lightning, arc shot. A bolt of lightning flew from my hand and slammed into the head of the first ogre. Then, instead of just dispersing after the first ogre, it leapt from that ogre and onto the others. Finally, after a few more moments, the lightning faded and all 6 remaining ogres collapsed onto the ground, their hearts stopped from the massive influx of electricity in their bodies. Nina had a look of awe after my display of power while Lucrute chuckled. I took down more. The ogres still only count as 1, he joked. You know what they say, Lucrute, quality is better than quantity. I retorted. Looking to my other comrades, I spotted Peter and Dine walking up to us with large, triumphant grins on their faces. Thanks for stopping those ogres before they got to us. I doubt that we could have taken them on, even with the magic you used to enhance us, were the first words out of Peter's mouth. I didn't know you were strong enough to kill that number of ogres simultaneously. I shrugged at the remark. I actually could have killed them all before they reached us. I really just wanted to see you guys in action, with me stepping in when needed. And, let me tell you, none of you disappointed me. I answered. We were very lucky to have met you then. None of us expected for the number of attackers to be that large. This should have been a job for a gold-plate adventurer or at least a larger party than us if you weren't here. That did make me curious about what was happening out in the wilds that the humans here weren't paying attention to. From what I've seen and heard, humans in this kingdom don't really care about the demi-human races as long as they left humans alone. A large group of ogres and goblins like that shouldn't have been so hidden for the amount of time that they had been raiding. From all evidence that I've seen, there must be something or someone that was uniting large groups of demi-humans in the woods. This also reminded me about what the goblins had said about the ogres being very hungry lately. I needed to get to the bottom of this, and either figure a way to end this violence peacefully or by force. To do that, I needed some ogre or goblin to interrogate. And, as luck would have it, there were 2 ogres running through the woods right now. Hold the fort down here for a bit. I'm going to go after those ogres to find out some information. I told the others quickly as I ran towards the edge of the trees at a speed that most would be surprised to see coming from a woman in heels. After enough time wearing these boots, I stopped noticing any difficulty in walking or running. I assumed that it was because of my greater agility, passive. When I arrived at the edge of the woods, I got a good look at my trap handiwork from earlier. The entire area was littered with the charred remains of ogres and goblins that had instantly died from the explosions. That reminded me that I needed to remove my traps. So, with a thought, the traps quickly deactivated. With that taken care of, I quickly started sniffing the area. Trying to ignore the smell of burning flesh, I focused in on the stench of ogre that hadn't been overly charred like a bad steak. I began running into the woods while following the scent. My search was also aided by the crushed vegetation that the ogres had trampled over in their effort to escape. Even with the head start that they had, I was quickly gaining on the two of them as both their stench became more pronounced, and my ears could pick up their loud stomps. Ogres had the advantage against most weaker races due to their great strength and thick hide. They were built to be humanoid tanks that could take a hit and dish it out just as hard. Despite these natural advantages, they came with weaknesses. Their large size and heavy mass made them very slow, and they needed to consume an immense amount of calories to compensate for all the energy it takes to even move all that muscle. It took me less than a minute for me to finally catch up to the ogres, and the moment I did, I cast the spell, Earthen Defense, which caused a wall composed of rock to rise up from the ground and block the path of the ogres. Both ogres turned around and spotted me as I slowed down to a walking pace about 14 meters away from them. I have some questions that I want you to answer. Give me what I want to know now, and I can make this a simple conversation. Or you can. The ogres didn't even give me time to finish as they started charging me. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the suicidal charge. Didn't they just see me take out a bunch of their friends without a sweat? With how weak these two were, I didn't even bother casting spells. Instead, I stabbed two of my invisible tails into the ground as anchors and the rest in front of my body as a shield. The moment that the two ogres slammed their clubs at me, both wooden clubs snapped into splinters, leaving the ogres holding only handles of their former weapons. I feel that you don't understand the situation here. Two of my tails snaked out from my shield and wrapped themselves around the necks of the ogres before lifting them off the ground. Right now, I'm your judge, jury, and even an executioner. I could crush both of your windpipes right now and be on my way, but I'm feeling quite merciful as I've killed quite a bit today. After saying this, I slammed both ogres into the ground and moved two of my tails pointed down over their foreheads. Then, I let my illusion fade away to reveal my true glory. Both ogres didn't even struggle as they quickly realized their situation. The moment they tried anything, I could stab my tails into their heads or crush their windpipes without a second thought. Now that you are finally understanding what's happening, I hope that both of you can be more cooperative with me, I said in the friendliest tone that I could as a way to put them on edge. I remembered the way my mom could terrify me after I'd done something wrong by speaking in that very friendly tone. Both ogres quickly nodded in reply and I slightly loosened my tails on their throats. First of all, why are you raiding the farms in this area? It's less risky to hunt in the woods or attack a random traveler without getting an adventuring party hunting you. Food. The ogre to my left said. Big kick ogre out of green home. The right ogre said. What is this green home? Why did the big one, as you call it, force the ogres to leave? I asked. How strong was this big one that they could force all the ogres out of their green home? Green home is big with club growers. Club growers. Were they talking about trees? Up from sunset and human rock home. Big unstrong. Make ogre leave. No food down sunset and green home. Ogre many, food less. The right explained in his broken English. From what I think I understood, their green home was a forest that was up north from Rantle, as it was the only settlement nearby that could fit their description of rock home. These ogres may have come from the great forest of Tob. Something in those woods forced the ogres to migrate south in mass. I'd reckon that's why the goblins' village had come together in the first place. With the large influx of ogres down south, they were eating all the available food in the woods faster than the animals could breed and replenish. Right now, nature was taking its course and the ogres were all starving to death. Because they were running out of food, and they were being left with the options of eating each other or the goblins. The two races decided to cooperate and steal food from the only areas that had plentiful amounts of food. This explained why the farms were getting raided, and why the raiding group, which had been smaller in its last raid, had gained many more members. Competition and hunger were forcing the ogres to raid, and the goblins to help them or else be eaten by the ogres. I needed to go to that great forest and investigate what is happening if I wanted to prevent more raiding parties from popping up around Rantle. But first, I needed to deal with the two ogres at my feet. I quickly unwrapped my tails from their necks and pulled all my tails away from the two ogres. "Do both of you have names?" I asked. The ogres seemed confused at my question, probably because they weren't used to an enemy asking questions like I was. It took a few moments before the first on my left answered. Vulpine. The right ogre, encouraged by his companion's answer, spoke as well, Vulpine. Both these ogres were hungry and thought with their stomachs. But they were also immensely intimidating, strong, and tough, which would make them great guards for many locations, including a certain goblin village that could use the help if I wasn't around all the time. "I have a deal for the two of you that could make you both very happy if you were to agree." Both ogres looked at me while being completely silent. "I have a small settlement that I plan on turning into a village. Right now, that settlement could use a couple of guards to fight off anything that might attack it. The benefits for guarding this settlement would be a roof over your heads, company, along with food and water." The moment I mentioned food, both ogres looked like dogs begging for scraps. "Would this offer interest either of you?" Both ogres quickly nodded repeatedly. "You strong like big un. Strong get food. I follow strong." Vulpine answered with a quick bow of his head. "Club break on you. You beat Tun clan with magic. Beat us with strength. I follow you." Vulpine stated with a nod of deference to me. I was interested in the way that these ogres venerated strength. It seemed that if I could put on a strong enough show of power, then the ogres would be more willing to follow your orders. I'd have to keep that in mind if I fight other ogres. "I'm going to teleport both of you to the settlement. When you get there, tell them that Casha Blanc sent the two of you. The one in charge of the settlement while I'm gone is Marp. He'll tell you what to do when you get there." It was simple to teleport the two of them with the spell, Lesser Gate, which was the weaker version of the Gate spell. It cost less mana, and was very quick to cast. Unlike Gate, this spell could only teleport a group of 10 people at a time, with limits on the distance being 14 miles unless you shoved more mana into the spell. Both ogres watched in amazement as a black portal appeared before them. With some hesitation, both stepped through the portal and I closed it behind them. Putting up my illusion once again, I quickly used teleportation to arrive back at the farm in front of my comrades and the farmer. With a grin, I spoke, took care of the two ogres after I caught up to them. They won't be raiding farms anymore. I decided to leave out the bit about the big one that the ogres told me about. While it is important information, I had a feeling that the moment that Rantle and the farmers learned about this, they'd march on the great forest with torches and pitchforks. I'd rather not watch an ecosystem be destroyed by an angry mob or have the deaths of any human who entered that forest on my mind. This was something that I could take care of on my own without anyone getting hurt. And this gave me the chance to go to that forest and explore. And I could head to the Great Lake and go swimming afterwards. Seems like a fun day. "Did you learn anything from them?" Peter asked. "Not much. There wasn't anyone else in their raiding group, we took care of them all." The farmer had a grateful sigh as I said this. "Thank the gods that I don't have to worry about those monsters coming back. That's a weight off my mind, to be sure. Without your help, my livelihood would have been destroyed, so you'll forever have my thanks for that. If any of you ever need help, I'll do whatever is within my power to make up my debt to all of you." "It was no problem, sir. Any decent person would do what they could to help a person in need," Dine humbly replied. The farmer seemed to lose his smile for a moment before he corrected himself. "You may say that, but these aren't decent times. With the Baharuth warmongers and slain fanatics at our doorstep, and the drafting of able-bodied men for the army, people have become less friendly to one another. One of my farmhands, Arden, is a boy who hasn't even grown stubble yet, but was drafted by the king a month ago. The farmer said in a defeated tone. This kingdom was on the precipice of collapsing in on itself. A populace that has lost all hope in their government is one that's more likely to revolt. Unless the Re-Estize kingdom could get a handle on their continual war with the Baharuth, the populace was going to turn on itself. Just the loss of a few farmers was affecting the food supply of the kingdom. I wouldn't even put it past the Baharuth Empire to be sending spies and infiltrators to rile up the peasants into a frenzy. When the food eventually ran out, this kingdom would fall. This world is a new start for me, and since I ended up in this kingdom of all places, I was going to make sure to do my best in preventing it from falling. The food problem is something that I needed to take care of. This world's magic was heavily based on that of Yggdrasil's, which means that they've probably invented spells that deviate from those of the game. There might be a spell that had been created here that I could learn to fix the food problem, but that was only a possible solution. There also might be a spell in my repertoire that could also solve these problems. And, with my knowledge from my technologically advanced world, I could possibly enhance the farming techniques in this world if they haven't already. I was also curious as to why they didn't use magic to augment farming. But this is just the prattling of an over-the-hill farmer. Lucrute and Nina, here's the reward I promised. You both were very helpful and entertaining. The farmer reached into his pockets and pulled out 2 small bags of coins that he tossed to the adventurers. You'll receive the rest of your reward at the Adventurers Guild. Looking around the area, I saw that it was still filled with the corpses of the ogres and goblins that we'd killed. What are you going to do about all the bodies? Don't you worry, miss. I was assured by the Rantel military that they'd send some men over to remove them. Since my farm helps provide part of the meat that the city consumes, they want to make sure that nothing can hinder my job. Besides, the 5 of you have done more than enough today. Go home and enjoy yourselves. Then we'll be taking our leave. Good luck with the farm, I replied. Thanks for the extra pay, Lucrute added with a grin. Before we left the farm, I ended my spells that were still active around the farm and on my companions. We left the farm after that and started walking down the road once more. While Peter and Lucrute chatted with one another, and Dine remained quiet while taking in all the nature that we were around, Nina spoke to me after enough hesitation. Kasha, I have a question for you that I was wondering if you would answer. You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, and I won't tell the others your answer, she quickly added, which I nodded in agreement to, but are you able to cast spells over the 4th tier of magic? The way that you could cast and maintain all those enchantments placed on us in the battlefield, and use all those powerful spells on the ogres and goblins makes me think that you're a lot more powerful than you're letting on. The girl whispered to me. She certainly was smart if she could catch onto me holding back my strength. I seriously doubted that she thought I could cast spells higher than 5th tier, but she knew that something was up. Might as well tell the girl a half-truth, then she'd be less suspicious. Besides, showing my more powerful spells would be such a fun surprise that I didn't want to spoil. Yes, Nina, I'm a lot more powerful than I let on. Part of it is due to my lineage while the rest is because I worked to get as strong as I am, I whispered back before adding with a grin, and, I hope that you can keep it a secret just between us girls. The way that Nina seemed to freeze when I said this was all the reaction that I wanted and more. And, I know that I may have wanted to let Nina reveal her secret to me of her own volition, but this option was much more entertaining. And, Nina had revealed the secret that she knew about me, so it was only fair that I reveal a secret that I knew about her. How do you know? Nina whispered in shock as she looked at her other companions to make sure that none of them had heard what I said. I put my hand on her shoulder and gave her a reassuring squeeze. There were a few ways that I could tell. The way you walk for starters, even with all the self-control that you've done to make it seem more masculine, there is still the slight sway in your step. I'm guessing the cloak you wear is meant to mask that movement. Your appearance, while tomboyish, can't fully hide the feminine features of your face or voice. And I tapped my nose playfully. What does your nose have to do with anything? Nina asked in confusion. I wasn't lying earlier when I said that my body is more advanced than an average human. My nose can pick up the differences between males and females quite easily due to the hormones that both genders produce. I finished explaining. Nina was quiet for a few moments before finally speaking up. Why are you telling me this now? I shrugged in reply. You told me something about me that you had learned, so I felt that it was fair to do the same. And I doubt that you like hiding who you truly are all the time, so I felt that it might remove some of the burden on your conscience. Like I said before, I'm always available if you want to talk, you just have to ask me. By now, I had let the two of us fall behind from the other three to give us some more privacy. It just feels strange that someone else knows my secret. I kept the fact that I'm a girl hidden at first because it's safer to travel as a boy than it is a girl. After I met the others, I felt like them knowing my gender would hurt my friendship with all of them. I couldn't blame her for feeling worried about her relationship with the others. After all, they'd only known her as Nina the boy mage, and depending on how long Nina had been friends with the others, it may hurt them to know that she had hidden such an important part about herself for so long. Still, it wasn't healthy in the long term to keep a secret like that bottled up for so long. Nina, they are your friends, aren't they? You've laughed, fought, and bled together. It may hurt them to know that you've hidden who you are from them, but I doubt that they'd ever break their friendship with you. None of them seem the type to see gender as any reason to treat you differently, though Lucrute may or may not make possible passes at you. Nina giggled at the last part. She quickly calmed herself before looking up at me. I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to tell them right now. I can't do it. I nodded in understanding. It's your decision. I'll support whatever decision you make. Though, I may needlessly tease you because it's amusing to me. Kasha. That's not funny. Nina whined. I took my hand off her shoulder and playfully tousled her hair in retaliation. Hey, leave my hair alone. She ordered while shoving my hand off her head, then she tried to comb it back down with her fingers. Oh, so you do care about your hair. I would have thought that you'd act like a boy and ignore what your appearance looks like. You truly are a girl, I teased as I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her into an inescapable bear hug that any man would kill for in her position. As an adult and your mentor in magic, it's my duty to mercilessly tease my student in all matters of their life. She struggled and pulled her head from my chest to look me in the eyes. Wait, you're making me your student now? Looking down at her, I nodded and gave her a soft smile. Of course. You handled yourself well enough during the battle to prove to me that you have talent in magic. And I can't resist having a student who I can order around and embarrass. This'll be so much fun for me. And you, I added, but mostly me. Nina sighed at my declaration. Can you at least let me go? Your chest is suffocating me. Acquiescing to her request, I let her out of my grip and watched as she took a breath that she'd been holding in. Note to self, possible ability to suffocate people with hugs. Potentially deadly weapon used in the right situations. Kasha, when do you plan to start teaching me? Nina asked after regaining her breath. That did make me think. There were multiple things that I needed to do this week, but I can always use a replicant to do those chores. So, technically any time, though I would like to do a lot of the teaching myself instead of sending a copy since it would give me a greater sense of accomplishment that I couldn't get if a copy did all the work. In 2 days, after we finish whatever job we do with the others, I'll take you with me to start training. And don't worry about being tired or low on mana after the job since I'll just use the enchantment I used on all of you earlier. There's no room to be tired in Kasha Blanc's magic class. I answered with more enthusiasm than I thought. I don't know if I should be happy or worried about whatever you're going to make me do, Nina said with a nervous look on her face. The girl had no idea what kind of training that we would be doing tomorrow. If she didn't know any protective spells, she'd learn them by the time I was done with her. Both would be a suitable choice. Now, how about we catch up with the others? I'm sure that they're wondering what we could possibly be talking about. And, I want to get back to Rantel soon because Lucrute is paying for my dinner tonight. I didn't mention that I also wanted to use my, Loki's call, ability to verify if what I've been wondering is correct. I also needed to debrief my copy about what has happened with the goblins today, and what she could have possibly done in the city while I was away. After that, I had another list of things to do which would need to be done tomorrow. I'd need to check in on the goblin settlement and make sure that the ogres were set up, as well as do some cleaning of the area if my copy hadn't already done so. After that, I had to go north to the Great Forest and find this big one that the ogres talked about and take care of the problem. Then, I'd check out the Great Lake and have some fun. To accomplish this, I'll probably have a copy of myself take my place with the others on whatever job that they were going to do that day. After that, I've been thinking of changing the terrain of the goblin settlement to be more defensible than what it is now. The pond was also another issue that needed to be taken care of. I've been thinking about a way to fix that, and my idea involved expanding the pond into a small lake, filling that lake with a large water spell, then filling this newly made lake with fish. The Great Lake up north could possibly help me with that issue since it should have a large supply of marine species. There's also the possibility of expansion in the settlement. At the rate that I've been recruiting newcomers to the settlement, we'd need more housing to fit the residents in. I could always create hollow hills that had multiple floors and rooms. That would work, but I was thinking far ahead of myself right now. Right now, I had to get back to Rantel. It was almost an hour later before we arrived at the Guildhall and collected our pay for the job. I felt happy with the weight of my silver coins in the coin purse on my belt. It just felt satisfying to get a reward that was immensely better than the measly amounts of copper I earned yesterday. That certainly was a job well done, Peter said as he collected his pay. This job would have taken much longer if we didn't have your assistance, Kasha. It was a great decision to invite you into our group. Yeah, we may have gotten seriously hurt without your help. We're lucky to have recruited you to our group first before anyone else. Your versatility and spellcasting could help for many challenging missions. Dine added with a clap on my shoulder. I smiled and nodded at the compliment. Keep saying things like that and I'm going to start blushing, Dine chuckled at my comment. He's just telling the truth, Peter reassured me. So, now that the job's done, will you be joining us for a job tomorrow? He asked, changing topic. While I would love to, I have some chores and commitments that I need to do tomorrow, but I'll be able to work with all of you the day after. I answered. Even though they seemed understanding of my answer, it was hard for them to hide their disappointment. Is there any way that I could help you? I'm always available if you need it, Lucrute stated in that chivalrous tone of his. That's just adorable. But I wanted to keep everything that I was doing secret from Lucrute and the others. It was way too early in my relationship with them to reveal things, like a goblin settlement under my control or that I was going off to the Great Forest of Tob to deal with the big one so that ogres would stop getting pushed into human territories and cause conflict. I wanted to keep the others out of that mess because they definitely weren't strong enough for a task like that. I didn't doubt that they had skills, but if they had some trouble against a large party of ogres, then they would be crushed by whatever could force ogres to flee their territories. I didn't want to risk them getting hurt, and it would distract me from my task if I had to focus some of my attention on protecting the four of them from harm. Next time might be a possibility if I could make them stronger and give them better gear. Until then, the safest place that all of them could be is off on the sidelines. There was also another small reason that I wanted to keep them out of this situation: they were all human. I doubt that residents of the Great Forest would be that accommodating to a species who were known for looking down upon non-human races. I might be able to ease possible negotiations considering that I'm not human. I just need to enter the forest while I wasn't in my human guise. Sorry, Lucrute, this is something that I need to do on my own. If I ever need help with something in the future, then I'll let you be the first to know. I assured the blonde, which seemed to calm him down as the macho stature of his relaxed. All right, I will hold you to that promise. On to more important topics of discussion. A ridiculous grin grew on Lucrute's face as he said this. I know a perfect place to have our date tonight. It has wonderful food and drink that I know you'd love. Yes, free food and attention so lovingly lavished upon me. I would be quite the fool to turn such a tempting offer down. And I couldn't help but instinctually feel the need to accept such gifts, especially when they were so generously offered. With such enthusiasm about taking me out for dinner, I can't find any reason to turn that offer down. You can pick me up later tonight at the Hero's Respite Inn, I answered. Excellent, my lovely sorceress. I'll see you later tonight. If everything is settled, I'm going to be heading off. Farewell. A chorus of goodbye, Kasha, or similar send-offs were uttered by the group as I made my way out of the Guildhall with a wave. That group was really beginning to grow on me. When I was far enough from the building, I used my teleport spell to arrive at a random section of the woods that I had passed when I chased after the ogres earlier. My reason for arriving in the ass end of nowhere was because I wished to avoid a mess and the questions that followed if I accidentally summoned Jormungandr. Out here, there was little risk, besides the farmer freaking out due to him being less than 2 miles away. His property would be safe since any summons with Loki's call always appeared in the area in front of where the caster was looking. With a deep breath, I held my hand out and spoke, Loki's call. A large, green, runic circle appeared beneath my feet as I felt a great gust of wind tear at my hair and clothes. Before my eyes, a green light began growing in front of me that seemed to suck all the light near it into the growing green light that started forming a pillar about 6 feet high. Finally, the pillar burst into fragments, releasing all the light that had been trapped inside of it out into the area. I had to shut my eyes due to how blinding the burst of light was. That was when I heard a long chuckle and the clapping of a pair of hands. I've been waiting for you to call to me, and you didn't disappoint in the slightest. We have much to talk about, my foxy disciple. A deep voice full of mirth stated. I quickly blinked my eyes open and was greeted to the sight of a man in a regal green coat over black leather armor. On his head was a green jester's cap that would have seemed ridiculous if anyone else had been wearing it. The man had dark hair that went down to his shoulders, while his face was a mix between that of a model and a warrior. There were laughter lines on the corners of his piercing green eyes that stared at me warmly. This was Loki Laveson, god of tricksters, shape-changer, wizard of lies, slayer of Balder, and a multitude of other names. I stood before a god in both body and name, and I instinctively felt the momentous amount of power that rolled off the god. Where I'm like a sun to the people of this world, Loki's power was like a solar system that surrounded my sun and managed to completely dwarf my own power. It was unsettling to feel this massive difference of power since I was used to always being the strongest being in the room. What I didn't understand was why he felt so powerful here in this new world compared back to Yggdrasil. While I'm happy to see you, I believe that we could do for some better accommodations. As Loki said this, he snapped his fingers and the forest around us disappeared and was replaced with a log cabin that had a warm fire going in the fireplace. The most terrifying part of what had just happened was that I had no idea if this was an illusion that Loki had cast or an actual place that he had conjured. Why don't you take a seat and slip into something more comfortable? Another snap of his fingers and my clothes disappeared and were replaced with a tight green silk evening gown while my illusion to hide my true self vanished with my clothing. I didn't have time to complain about this change in attire as a chair bumped into the back of my legs and swept me off my feet before catching me in its cushioned embrace. You know, I don't exactly enjoy having my items and clothes taken away like that, I stated with a roll of my eyes. Loki gave me a sly grin as I said this. You're certain that you'd like your items back now? The way he asked that made me completely suspicious, and I was about to say no, but his fingers were quicker as, with another snap, I noticed that the evening gown had been replaced with only my underwear. I couldn't help but sigh at the phrasing of his question. Oh, don't be like that, I'm the god of tricksters for a reason. Everyone can incur some type of mischief upon themselves, not even my own followers are completely immune to my jokes, he said with another snap that returned all my clothes back. I couldn't help but grin at the god, that would also imply that the god of tricksters could also be tricked himself. I'll keep that in mind the next time that I try and summon you. I answered as I leaned back into my chair and crossed my legs. Loki burst into another round of chuckling before he spoke again. It's exactly that type of mindset which interested me enough to make you my chosen in the first place. I couldn't help but wonder about something that was bothering me since I realized that he was completely sapient. Were you sapient before when in the game Yggdrasil, or did you only become self-aware here in this new world? I asked the god with keen interest. I've always been aware of what occurred to my representative within that game of yours. While my existence has been bound to this world, any manifestation of myself, imagined by humans or otherwise, have always retained a connection to my very being. I know what my counterparts know, fake or real. Illusions and trickery have always been based within both the realms of reality and fiction. If you exist here, then what about any other gods or goddesses that were in Yggdrasil? Are they also aware of what has happened to their representatives in the game? And, did divine beings even exist on my Earth, or were they just fake? If I had an actual god to talk to, I kinda wanted to get a lot of unanswered questions about the divine and the afterlife answered that many people would kill for. There are some gods and goddesses from your game that do exist here, just as I do, and there are others that were never portrayed in your game as well. For instance, Odin certainly exists and is well aware of you killing his representative within the game before you arrived here. He is quite sour about that. Oh, shit. Pissing off a god, even unintentionally, might bite me in the ass later on. Try not to worry about Odin too much. You are the chosen of Freya after all. She has some sway with Old One-Eye. There is also your mother who resides in this plane. My ears perked up when Loki said this, and the god's grin seemed to grow at my reaction, but that is something for another time. I have other matters that I wish to discuss with you. No doubt you've been wondering how you possibly ended up in this realm with that body of yours, right? Even though I had an instinctual urge to find out more about Inori, mother, knowing about why I had ended up in this world had much higher importance. It had been a question that has entered my mind more than once since my arrival, and I wanted my curiosity sated. I have. My revelation of this world being real, and not a computer program, has made me wonder how something could drag me from one world to another. In what way was Yggdrasil connected to this world, and why I was even brought here in the first place? Always the curious one. Kasha, as you like to be called in this world, understand that you are not the first player to have been brought to this realm. Others have come before you as either conquerors or saviors. I couldn't prevent my jaw from dropping as I heard this. I wasn't the first player to have come here, which meant that something had been pulling players from Yggdrasil to this world for years. When did the other players arrive? They couldn't have been here for more than a decade at the least. Wouldn't news about some powerful beings arriving here have spread quickly? This changes everything. I wouldn't be alone in this world without anyone from my previous home anymore. There was news about these players, centuries ago. Most reports said that all of them died, either of battle or old age. I'm sorry to tell you this. My chest hurt as my mind couldn't make a decision on whether I should scream in rage, cry in sorrow, or perform a mixture of both actions. Feeling such intense emotions like this was new to me, and it took all of my self-control to keep myself from breaking down emotionally. Hearing news such as this is distressing, I know. But you need to understand now that you cannot go home. Such options were erased with the ending of Yggdrasil. Accepting your new life here is the only possibility for you. The god tried to console me, but part of me, the part still connected to my former life back on Earth, felt destroyed at learning this. My old life was truly over, Aaron Smith was truly gone, and in his place was a kitsune woman named Kasha Blanc. Why was I brought here? Who was the one that did it? I asked softly. No one knows. What is known is that some being connected the game Yggdrasil to this world through some form of magic on the level of a god. What I have inferred from years of investigating this phenomenon is that players are brought here from the game through a soul snare embedded within the foundations of the game. This soul snare, when activated, will pull the player's soul here with their avatars becoming their new bodies upon arrival. You were an unlucky soul who was within the game when the being activated the snare before the game was shut down. Loki appeared to be contemplating as his eyes seemed to grow distant for a moment. That answered the how, but not the why. Is this something you've figured out? Loki was pulled out from his thoughts as he looked me in the eyes. I don't know. The being might be pulling people here to gain immensely strong soldiers without any previous allegiances. It could be due to the power your souls contain that the being might be harvesting. They could even be doing it because it's amusing how players radically change this realm. Whatever the reason, you should be on guard since none of the reasons are for your benefit. All the explanations had some sense of reasonability, but none could be accepted until I got to the bottom of this mystery. I would keep Loki's advice to heart since he is right. I wasn't brought here for my benefit, the benefits for me were only a side effect of the original reason. I'll be careful if that's the case. Is there anything else that you wish to tell me? My enthusiasm to talk with an actual god had been rapidly drained after this whole conversation. I just wanted it to end at this point so that I could stop keeping my calm visage up. Just a few things that I'm allowed to say. Allowed to say? What information was Loki holding back from me? And what was preventing him from telling me more? Old things are beginning to stir, and some might even be a match for you. Nothing is a match for me. I am beyond compare. The gods and goddesses will remain neutral in most situations unless it's directly related to them. That sounds like bullshit. You're interacting with me right now. I quickly replied. Loki only smiled and made a tut-tut sound. Kasha, you are my chosen, that automatically makes you someone that I can directly interact with normally. To prove his point, he snapped his fingers and left me in my underwear once more, then he snapped again and brought my clothes back, summoning me, like you did, gives me a loophole to ignore my neutrality as long as it's tied to you. It just depends on if you even summon me in the first place, and that's a very low chance. I'm mostly going to be summoning Ratatoskra, aren't I? Very much so. You'll have a lower chance of summoning me here than in Yggdrasil. Me talking to you now is a courtesy, otherwise you'd have gotten Fenrir as your conversation partner. He isn't a good conversationalist, Loki sighed at the mention of Fenrir, much like a dad who couldn't believe the type of stupidity that their child just demonstrated. It won't be that much of a problem. I can handle most trouble that I get myself involved in. Back in Yggdrasil, I could count on both hands the amount of times that I ever summoned Loki. I never liked to put all my eggs in one basket by having only one plan of attack, especially an unreliable one like Loki's call. Excellent. That's the spirit. Now, I only have a little bit of time remaining, so I want you to know one last thing before I go. Loki's whimsical tone quickly turned deadly serious. When players are brought here, it's usually in batches. And players brought here usually become tyrants more often than saviors. The moment Loki said that, I felt torn between relief that I might not be alone after all, fear of a tyrant that would kill innocent people, and anger that someone would dare touch those who I considered under my protection. Treat that information as you will. Good luck, Kasha. The god's tone rapidly flipped to a chipper one as he said this. Then, Loki gave me a wink before both he, and the cabin that we were in, faded away into green mist that dispersed throughout the forest. I was finally alone, with only the noises of crickets and other animals to keep me company. I'm trapped here. Permanently without any method to get back home. My voice wavered as I understood the gravity of what I had to choose. I could keep holding on to my life as Aaron Smith and continue to feel the pain of never seeing my old home. I wasn't even related to my old family biologically because of my new body. My name. All these memories of being Aaron Smith are like sand castles being washed away by the ocean waves. I'm already changing in small ways, and while Aaron Smith made up the skeleton of my personality, something else was becoming the flesh. And now, with nothing to continue keeping the hope of Aaron Smith returning home alive, that part of me had lost the will to remain as prominently as it once had. My name is. With a shudder, I felt tears begin to roll down my cheeks. My name is Kasha Blanc. Like a dam being opened, Tears poured out of eyes and I began sobbing before I choked out, Aaron Smith, son of Seth and Julian Smith, is dead. Kasha Blanc, daughter of Inori, is who I am now. I curled up into a ball and felt my tails wrap around me as I let out all my emotions in that empty forest. Stepping into the goblin settlement after using a teleportation spell, I glanced around and spotted some of the new changes that had been implemented here. Surrounding the entire settlement was a 7-meter-high wall made of stone. All the tents, which were made of sticks and ratty cloth, had been exchanged with simple earthen huts that were 5 feet high. The trash that had been littering the area had been removed, while the small pond looked completely clear compared to yesterday. Much of the overwhelming stench that had filled the area before was gone. I'm guessing that my clone made that the first chore to be done when she arrived. I also spotted a pile of tools and weapons resting on top of a stone table that was merged with the ground beneath it, my clone's doing no doubt. Lady Kasha. You finally arrived. I didn't even need to turn around to tell that it was the voice of Map. And he called me Lady Kasha. I love it. Turning around, I gave him a smile and spotted the new sword that was sheathed on his hip. Hello, Map. Seems like you've made some big changes since I was last here. Mind telling me about them? The hobgoblin rapidly nodded with a large grin. Of course. Your clone told us that you sent her to collect supplies and take care of the settlement while you were off on a mission. She arrived with large bags of supplies that almost made some of the boys pass out in excitement. When we were equipped with our new weapons, she decided that we needed more protection, so she used this amazing magic to make walls rise from the earth and transform our tents into huts. After that, she used some more magic to purify the pond while the rest of us were told to clean up the trash and do a few other things. Sounds like you had a busy day. Anything else happen? Well, when those 2 ogres arrived, I thought that Laha was going to have a heart attack. They explained everything after your copy calmed everyone down. We showed them around the settlement while your copy built some huts for them. They've been patrolling the settlement ever since. After that, your copy conjured up this hut by the pond and went inside for a while. We heard some weird moaning coming from there, but we were told to not bother her. Map finished with a deep inhale. That last part was a little odd, but I'd ask my copy about it in a little bit. Right now I simply patted Map on the shoulder. You did a good job today. If the amount of progress that I've seen today keeps happening, then this will be a great village in no time. We couldn't do it without you, Lady Kasha. Map replied. He then took my hand in his before saying, if you'll follow me, I can take you to where all the boys are. I nodded and let the hobgoblin lead me through the village until we arrived in front of the makings of a farm. The goblins were tilling the ground in long lines. They had cleared out 8 feet by 10 feet of dirt and were still going at it. I couldn't help but look down at Map as he smiled proudly at the progress his comrades made. When were you taught how to farm? I asked while continuing to look at the goblins' labor. They were so invested in their work that they hadn't even noticed our arrival. Your copy showed us what we needed to do with the hose she brought, then she had us digging out lines of dirt in the open space over here. She said that she planned to get seeds for us to plant tomorrow, so we'll have to wait until we can start raising crops. In the meantime, this is good practice for when we need to make more farming spaces. Map explained with a positive attitude. At least he was looking on the bright side of this delay. Unfortunately, now I needed to find a place that sold vegetable seeds. At least the farming will make you more self-sufficient. We'll need multiple sources of food if we're going to feed everyone here, especially the ogres. I wondered about finding a way to condense the farming. I'd need to think hard on a solution if this settlement continued to gain residents. That's the idea. As I took note of each goblin before me, I quickly spotted someone missing. A hobgoblin. I don't see Trabgo anywhere. Any idea as to where he went off to? I asked. Trabgo said that he was going scouting around the forest. He'll probably be back tomorrow or the day after. I must have showed my concern quite easily on my face as Map quickly added, not much to worry about concerning him since he's got a good head on his shoulders and knows when run. He'll be back soon enough. His assurance placated some of my fear, but there were still the hungry ogres that were migrating down here. If you are sure, then we'll just have to wait for Trabgo to come back home. If everything has been taken care of here, then I'm going to talk to my copy for a bit before I leave. I'll be sending another copy here tomorrow to help in any way necessary while I head up to the great forest of Tog to hunt down some creature up there. I'll arrive later in the day to check in on all of you. Map nodded in agreement. Sounds like a plan. I'll hold down the fort here until then. Happy hunting, Lady Kasha. I walked off after he said this and heading to the stone shack by the pond where my copy supposedly was staying. When I arrived, I knocked on the simple wooden door. "Hey, you in there?" I asked. My ears picked up a scuffling sound before the door opened to the face of my grinning copy, whose clothing seemed hastily put on while her hair was a mess and the fur on her tails seemed ruffled. "Anything to report?" My copy leaned against the door with a grin. Goblin settlement has had an increase in its standard of living. Nothing strange occurred while under my watch. If 2 ogres magically appearing in the middle of the settlement isn't considered strange, and supplies were delivered. Sounds like it was a simple day. Boss, that's just the boring stuff. The real fun is what I did in Rantle to some uppity high-class snobs, and the amazing test run I did with this body. She leaned in close to me and whispered, "Let me tell you, this body is definitely up to par." She trailed off. That's when I realized just what she'd been doing in this shack. "Really? You couldn't just keep it in your... Technically, it's a dress," she interrupted, "and I'm a copy of you, so technically it would be something that originated from your mind." I couldn't help but sigh at the fact that I'm arguing with myself over something so ludicrous. Whatever. I really don't feel in the mood to argue with myself right now. I conceded. "You going to disperse, or would you like some more time to do whatever it is you wish to do?" "I think I can call it a day. Already did everything that I needed to do, and there really isn't much I can amuse myself with since I've done quite a bit already. See you around, boss." When my copy said this, her body quickly burst into flames that died in the air until no trace of my former copy remained. You could say that it was enlightening to understand how infuriating I could be. After all, I now had hands-on experience with that matter. Yet, even the annoyance of dealing with my copy, and the pride I had in the goblin's progress wasn't enough to fully block out the sorrow that I still felt. I could hide it as best as I could, but I would still feel the part of myself that was missing.